When talking about anime movies, it's pretty much impossible not to bring up Studio Ghibli. They have delivered classic after classic, such as Totoro, Princess Mononoke, and Spirited Away, just to name a few. But generally, when people talk about the best Studio Ghibli movies, they will name something directed by Hayao Miyazaki. Understandable, as he's pretty much been the face of Ghibli. But today I want to recommend a Ghibli movie directed by someone else. Another legendary director that sadly passed away 4 years ago. Today, I want to recommend Isao Takahata's slice of life film, Only Yesterday. But before we get into the recommendation, I have something to tell you guys. I have a website now called retroverse.net. It's a school project, and it's still under construction. But I would appreciate it if you guys would go over there and check it out. Maybe drop me some feedback on what you would want to see from the website while you're at it. Anyways, let's get on with the recommendation. So Only Yesterday, or Omoide Poro Poro in Japanese, is, like I said earlier, a Studio Ghibli movie. It's from 1991, and it was directed by Isao Takahata, the man behind great films like Grave of the Fireflies and The Tale of Princess Kaguya. Only Yesterday is based on a manga of the same name by Hotaru Okamoto and Yuko Tone, which was released from 1987 to 1991. Though this movie adaptation and the manga differ from each other quite a bit, but we will talk more about that later. The story of Only Yesterday is set in 1982 and follows Taeko Okajima, a 27-year-old unmarried woman who has lived her entire life in Tokyo. Looking to get away from the rush of the big city, she decides to visit the family of her elder sister's in-laws, who live in the rural countryside of Yamagata. On the train there, she recalls memories of her childhood self in 1966, and the dreams she used to have of going on vacation outside the big cities, like the rest of her classmates. As she arrives in Yamagata, she is picked up by her brother-in-law's second cousin, named Toshio. He is someone Taeko barely knows, but they quickly hit it off and develop a friendship. During her time out in the countryside, she forms strong bonds with family and friends, and learns the difference between big city and rural life. And as she learns about farming, she also has a lot of time to reminisce about old memories of childhood romance, puberty, and frustrations of math and boys. And as we switch between the present and the past, Taeko starts wondering if she's been true to her childhood dreams. Alright, so have you ever experienced nostalgia from a story despite it being nothing like your own life? Well, I have. It's exactly what happened to me as I was watching this movie. I don't really relate to this story at all. I'm not a little girl, or a grown woman, as you might know, and I did not grow up in the big city. The only thing that I'm even close to relating to is wondering if I've given up on my childhood dreams too easily. But I feel like that is a pretty general thing as you grow older. But honestly, this is the strength of this movie. Even though you might not be able to relate to the story exactly as it is, the way it's told makes it feel very nostalgic. It brings up questions that most adults have probably thought of in one way or another at some point in their lives. And that for me is key. The grounded drama and slice-of-life nature of this movie is really effective for an older audience in my opinion. So much so that I would say that this is a movie that is really worth revisiting at different stages in your life. I would highly recommend this movie if you're an adult. If you're still a kid though, it might not be as effective for you. And that has nothing to do with this movie not being suitable for children, but more so because of its reflective nature and how the movie is about an adult looking back at her own life and her own choices that put her where she is now. Other than that though, there is also some romance in this movie, particularly between Taeko and Toshio. It's not the greatest or most satisfying romance I've ever seen in a movie, but it serves the overall narrative decently well. You see, the romance is tied to Taeko having to come to terms with who she is today, as well as who the people that matters the most to her are. Toshio being the one who has helped her the most in discovering herself. Because of the self-discovery she's had on this trip, she decides that she wants to stay in the countryside rather than return to the big city. She would much rather be closer to nature and free than being stuck in a boring office job in a bustling city like Tokyo. Though I am sad to say that if you're looking for great romance, you won't find it here. A relationship between Taeko and Toshio is mostly implied, but the movie doesn't really spend any time getting into any of that. I don't really consider that a negative though, because it's clearly not the point of the movie, and going down the whole romance part could easily become too distracting. No, Only Yesterday is more about the nostalgia and the bittersweet feeling of growing up and looking back at yourself. Did you achieve what you wanted to achieve? But most importantly, are you happy with yourself and where you're at? And if you're not happy about where you are, would you take the risk of change? This is what's most important in this movie, in my opinion, and why I consider Only Yesterday a great movie and a must-watch. Alright, so before we end, let's get into some fun facts about Only Yesterday. I found a lot of them for this movie, but I want to talk about a few that stood out to me. So the first fact is about why they ended up with the director that they did. Because while it was Isao Takahata who ended up directing this movie, it was originally Hayao Miyazaki who was intrigued by the manga and felt there was potential value in adapting this type of children's story. But Miyazaki did not feel like he could do it justice, and so we eventually brought the idea to Takahata. But Miyazaki still kept the idea in his head, as he would later go on and direct other children's movies, like Totoro. Secondly, we can talk about the animation, because this movie is animated a little differently to what is the norm. You see, this movie's character animation includes more realistic facial muscles and expressions than one would normally expect. This is a result of the dialogue being recorded before they did the animation. Normally when animating, you do the animation first and then record the voices later, which can be more helpful for the actor to know what sort of emotions they're supposed to use to fit the character's expression. Takahata also had the VAs record some lines together, and used footage of their performance as a guide for the design and animation. The exception to this, though, is in the scenes of Taeko's childhood. For those scenes, the animation was done first, and the voices were recorded later, which was done to give a subtle contrast between her childhood memories and the adult reality of the story. Lastly, I want to highlight how the manga was adapted. You see, the manga solely focuses on Taeko as an 11-year-old, and is told in the form of a memoir. So basically, the manga is a compilation of short stories about Taeko's daily life. This made it difficult for Takahata to adapt the story, so he came up with the idea of bringing the narrator into the story herself. That's why in the movie we follow adult Taeko. Also, the whole plot about Taeko going to Yamagata and meeting Toshio was Takahata's own idea. Alright, so those were my thoughts on the 1991 movie, Only Yesterday. A weirdly nostalgic movie, even though I can't relate to it at all. But the way the story is told is so filled with grounded realism that you can't help but think of your own childhood and compare. It is definitely a movie that is more fitting for adults than children, with very relatable and grounded drama. I thoroughly enjoyed my time watching this movie, and I hope that you will consider checking it out if you haven't already. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you do, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more anime recommendations and other anime related content from me. Peace!